Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. أما بعد أحبتي في الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أسأل الله كريم رب العرش العظيم أن يتولنا في الدنيا والآخرة. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the Almighty accepts our good and forgives our evil, protects us from kulli su' wa makruh, blesses us all with ikhlas, with thabat ala sunnat nabi sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Ahabati fillah. I was just listening to an interview, a very interesting interview, and I think there's 2 minutes left or something, 2 to 4 minutes left. And it was from our brother Mutah Beale, Hafidhullah Ta'ala, also known as Napoleon, who used to formerly be with the Outlaws. And those who know the history, they know the history. But what I wanted to say is why it was insightful and impactful, having a lot of impact, is just to see the growth of the brother, and as a believer in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, coming from the lifestyle, the background that he's come from, as with many of our brothers and sisters, in fact, around the world, going through troubles and travesty and hardship, but also with his sacrifice of leaving the music industry and still at the same time having ties with those communities. And it reminds me, similar to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam contacting the tribes and contacting, communicating with the peoples of his time, from the Quraysh, and inviting them to Islam and still having ties with them. And this shows us a very important example, and that we should be balanced based on the book and the sunnah, in that when we exercise the concepts of al-wala wal-bara, for example, loving for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal, that when we deal with other human beings, we are always under the microscope, and we are always being watched and viewed as a believer in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so that means exhibiting the characteristics and traits of the believer. And this is what I found from the interview. And I've seen some clips, and I have had the opportunity, I don't know if the brother remembers, but I did speak to him when I lived in Medina. At the time, myself and Shadeed Muhammad were very close, and he knows Shadeed very well. And I spoke to him on the phone. And I've always had an admiration for someone who makes the type of sacrifice and comes to the book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and this path, which is similar to the path of the Sahabat Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam radiyallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in, meaning knowing two different types of lifestyles, coming from disbelief and coming to Iman. And all of those of us who are reverts, we can empathize with that and have lived that in our lives. And so these are just some observations, and I see the nobility in his conduct and character from what I see portrayed and from what I've heard. And we ask that Allah Azza wa Jal preserves our brother and preserves the Muslims everywhere, and blesses us all with ikhlas, with thabat, and bless us all to set the beautiful examples. And before I end, I just want to mention one hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. The Prophet alayhi salatu wa salam said, "Ma min shayin athqalu fi mizan mu'min yawm al-qiyamah min husn khulq." He said, there isn't a thing that weighs heavier on the scale of a believer than good manners. وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يُبْغِضُ الْفَاحِشَ الْبَذِيءَ. And verily Allah hates wicked and sinful speech. So as believers in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we navigate with our non-Muslim relatives and old past and whatever avenue, doesn't matter, even amongst Muslims, that we have to set the example of a believer in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with good conduct and manners. And you don't know how you may influence others. And may Allah bless us with ikhlas, with thabat. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad.